The suitcase had my name, my handwriting, my regrets. But I've never been to the city stamped on the tag. It was waiting in the corner of the attic, beneath a moth-eaten quilt and a stack of yellowed newspapers dated 10 years before I was born. I hadn't planned to go up there. The realtor said the house was mostly cleared, but I'd felt something, like a pull behind my ribs, when I passed the narrow door at the end of the hallway. The kind of pull you feel when someone says your name in a dream. The suitcase was navy blue, scuffed at the edges, with a brass latch that clicked open too easily. Inside, a pair of leather gloves, a faded photograph of a woman with her back turned, and a journal. The gloves fit. The photo made my throat tighten. And the journal, well, the journal knew things. I didn't open it right away. I carried it downstairs like it might shatter, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it while the light shifted across the floor. The cover was cracked, the spine stitched with thread that looked hand-dyed. No title, no name, just a small symbol in the corner, a circle with a line through it, like a planet eclipsed. I made tea. I didn't drink it. I opened the journal. The first page was dated March 3rd, 1997. That's my birthday. But the entry wasn't written by a child. It began, "I saw her again today. She was wearing the red coat, the one I bought her before the forgetting started." I read it twice. The handwriting was mine. Not similar, identical. The way I looped my lowercase g, the slight tilt of my t's. But I hadn't written it. I couldn't have. I was 3 years old in 1997, and I've never bought anyone a red coat. The entries continued, scattered across years that didn't make sense. Some were dated in the future, some in the past. Some had no date at all, just a feeling. It was raining, but the sky was clear. She said the weather was broken again. I flipped through, searching for logic, for chronology, but the journal resisted. It wasn't meant to be read like a book. It was meant to be remembered. One entry stopped me cold. "He found the suitcase today. I left it where he'd feel it first, in the ribs, in the dream. He won't understand yet, but he'll follow the scent. Memory has a smell. He'll know." I looked around the room. The windows were closed. The air was still, but I smelled something, faint, like lavender and ash. I hadn't lit anything. I hadn't unpacked any soap. I hadn't brought anything scented. I touched the gloves. They were warm. I read for hours. The journal described places I'd never been, but could picture perfectly. A train station with green tiles and a clock that ran backward. A bookstore where the shelves rearranged themselves, depending on what you forgot. A woman named Elira who spoke in questions and left answers in the margins. I knew her name before I read it. I whispered it aloud and felt my pulse skip. There were entries that felt like dreams I'd had and forgotten. One described a hallway with mirrors on both sides, each reflecting a version of me that had made a different choice. One smiled. One cried. One turned away. The journal said, "He'll linger at the third mirror. He always does." That version loved her enough to stay. I didn't know who her was, but I felt the loss like a bruise. I tried to stop reading. I couldn't. The journal wasn't just telling a story, it was reconstructing me. Each entry rewired something. I began to remember things that hadn't happened. A birthday party in a house with blue walls. A song sung in a language I don't speak. A promise made beneath a flickering street lamp. I wrote them down, trying to separate what was mine from what was being given. But the lines blurred. One entry was written in a different ink, dark red, almost brown. It said, "He'll start to forget his own timeline." That's how it begins. The suitcase is a seed. The journal is the root. The gloves are the touch. The photo is the ache. He'll think he's discovering, but he's returning. I closed the journal. I opened the photo again. The woman's back was turned, but her posture was familiar. I knew how she stood when she was waiting. I knew the way her shoulder dipped when she was tired. I knew the coat. It was red. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the journal on my lap, the suitcase beside me, and the gloves on my hands. I felt like a trespasser in my own life, like I'd stepped into a version of myself that had been paused, waiting for me to catch up. I tried to call my sister. The line rang once, then went silent. I tried again. No signal. I checked the calendar on my phone. It said March 3rd, but the year was wrong. It said 1997. I blinked. The screen corrected itself. 2025. I laughed, too loudly. The sound echoed strangely. I looked at the journal. The last entry had changed. It now read, "He's laughing. That's good. It means he's still resisting. But not for long." I stood up. The room felt tilted. I walked to the window. The street outside was empty. No cars. No people. Just fog. I pressed my hand to the glass. It was warm. I looked down. The gloves were gone. My hands were bare. But I still felt them. I turned back to the suitcase. It was closed again. I hadn't touched it. I opened it. The gloves were inside. The photo was gone. In its place, a receipt. It said, "One red coat. Purchased March 3rd, 1997. Thank you for remembering." I sat down. I opened the journal. I began to write. But the words didn't feel like mine. My hand moved with a rhythm I didn't recognize, as if tracing a melody I'd once known by heart. The pen, one I hadn't seen before, was already on the table when I sat down. Brass-tipped, engraved with the same symbol as the journal's cover, a circle split by a line. I wrote, "She remembered me before I remembered myself." Then I stopped. The sentence pulsed. I could feel it in my teeth. I flipped back through the journal, searching for the entry that matched the feeling. It wasn't there. But the scent was lavender and ash, stronger now, like it had been waiting for me to write that line. I stood up. The room felt smaller. The walls leaned in. I walked to the hallway, past the attic door, and opened the front entrance. The fog was thicker. The street was still empty. But the air had changed. It smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I stepped outside. The world was quiet, but not silent. There was a hum beneath everything, like a distant engine or a memory trying to surface. I walked to the edge of the driveway. The mailbox was open. Inside, a single envelope, addressed to me in handwriting that matched the journal. No stamp. No return address. I opened it. The paper was thin, almost translucent. It read, "You left something in the train station. She's still waiting. Follow the scent." I looked up. There was no train station in this town, but I knew where it was. I could see it, green tiles, backward clock, the smell of old paper and static. I turned around. The house looked different. Older, like it had been waiting longer than I'd realized. I went back inside. The suitcase was open again. This time, there was a map, hand-drawn, with ink smudges and notes in the margins. It didn't show roads or cities. It showed feelings. Regret was marked with a red X. Hope was circled in blue. The place she forgot you was underlined twice. I traced the path with my finger. It led to a symbol I hadn't seen before, a mirror with no reflection. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. I took the journal, the pen, and the gloves. I left the house. The fog followed me. It didn't cling, it guided. I walked for what felt like hours, though my watch said 20 minutes. The landscape shifted subtly. Trees leaned in unfamiliar directions. Street signs bore names I almost recognized. One said Elira's Crossing. I stopped. That name again. I whispered it. The fog pulsed. I kept walking. The train station appeared like a memory resurfacing. Not suddenly, but with inevitability. Green tiles. Backward clock. A bench with a single book left open, pages fluttering despite the still air. I stepped inside. The scent hit me, lavender and ash, layered with something older. Paper. Ink. Dust. I walked to the ticket counter. No one was there. But a ticket waited. My name. My handwriting. Destination. The version that stayed. I took it. It was warm. I sat on the bench. The book was a journal. Not mine. Hers. The handwriting was different. Sharp. Slanted. Urgent. I read, "He's close." I left the scent for him. I stitched the memory into the gloves. I whispered the ache into the photo. I folded the map with my own hands. He'll remember me when he forgets himself. I turned the page. There was a drawing, me, or a version of me, standing in front of a mirror with no reflection. Behind me, her. Red coat. Eyes closed. Waiting. The train arrived without sound. It didn't stop, it paused. I stepped on. The interior was dim, lit by flickering bulbs that hummed in time with my pulse. No conductor. No passengers. Just rows of seats, each with an object placed carefully in the center. A watch. A ribbon. A broken key. A photograph of a child with my eyes. I walked slowly, absorbing each fragment. They felt like mine. Or almost mine. I sat in the last seat. The journal opened itself. A new entry appeared. He's on the train. He's almost ready. The forgetting will begin soon. The train moved. Outside, the world blurred, not with speed, but with memory. I saw places I hadn't visited but mourned. A park bench where I'd once said goodbye. A bookstore with rearranging shelves. A hallway of mirrors. A woman in a red coat. I pressed my hand to the window. It was cold now. The gloves were gone again. I looked down. My hands were ink-stained. The pen was still in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was leaking. I opened the journal. The ink spread across the pages, forming new words. He's leaking too. The boundaries are softening. Soon he'll be able to choose. I didn't know what choice it meant, but I felt it, like a fork in the road I hadn't seen until I'd already passed it. The train slowed. The lights dimmed further. A voice, not spoken, but felt, said, "Next stop." The version that stayed. I stood. The door opened. Fog poured in. I stepped out. The platform was empty, but the scent was strong. Lavender. Ash. Rain. I walked forward. The station was familiar. Not from memory, from longing. I entered the building. A mirror stood in the center. No reflection. I approached. Behind the glass, her. Eyes open. Red coat. She smiled. I reached out. The glass was warm. She whispered, "You're almost ready." I turned. The journal was open on a pedestal. A final entry waited. I read, "He'll choose soon. To stay. To forget. To remember. The suitcase will close. The scent will fade. But the ache will remain. That's how he'll know it was real." I closed the journal. I looked at the mirror. My reflection flickered. I saw versions of myself, each holding a different object. A photo. A map. A pen. A ticket. I chose the version with the ache. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, fractured. A single line down the center. I stepped through. Stepping through the fractured mirror felt like falling sideways into a memory I hadn't earned. The air was thicker, like breathing through velvet. The scent was muted now, still lavender and ash, but tinged with something metallic, like old blood or forgotten promises. I stood in a room that mirrored the train station, but it was wrong in subtle ways. The tiles were green, yes, but cracked in places that hadn't existed before. The clock still ran backward, but now it ticked audibly, each second a soft thud against my ribs. The journal was in my hand, though I didn't remember picking it up. The pen was gone. In its place, a ribbon tied around my wrist, red and frayed, pulsing faintly like a vein. There was a door at the far end of the room. It wasn't there before. I walked toward it, each step echoing like a footfall in someone else's dream. The door opened before I touched it. Inside, a hallway lined with photographs. Not hung, embedded. Each one shimmered slightly, as if resisting permanence. I looked closer. The first showed me as a child, standing beside a woman in a red coat. Her face was blurred, but her posture was unmistakable. The second showed me older, holding a suitcase, staring at a mirror. The third was blank. Beneath it, "To be taken." I reached out. My fingers passed through the frame. Cold. Wet. Familiar. The hallway ended in a spiral staircase, descending into shadow. I hesitated. The journal vibrated in my hand. I opened it. A new entry had appeared. "He's in the archive now. The place where versions are stored. He'll see what he could have been, what he still might be. But he must not linger. The ache will deepen." I closed the journal. I descended. The staircase led to a vast chamber, circular, with walls lined in drawers. Each drawer bore a name. Some I recognized. Some I feared. One said Elira. I opened it. Inside, a single glove. Not mine. Smaller. Worn. I touched it. A voice whispered, not aloud, but inside me. She waited. She stitched the scent into the seams. She folded the ache into the lining. She knew you'd find it. I placed the glove back. I opened another drawer. The version that forgot. Inside, a photograph of me, eyes vacant, standing in front of a closed suitcase. I felt nausea. I closed the drawer. I wandered the archive, drawn to names that pulsed faintly. The version that stayed. The version that left too soon. The version that never met her. Each held fragments, objects, scents, sounds. I opened one labeled "The Version That Lied." Inside, a journal identical to mine, but every entry was crossed out. I read one through the ink. I told her I remembered. I didn't. I wanted to, but the scent was fading. I closed it quickly. My hands trembled. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal. On it, a mirror. Not fractured. Not blank. This one reflected me, but not as I was. As I could be. Eyes sharper. Posture steadier. Ache contained, not erased. I stepped closer. The reflection spoke. Not aloud, not in words. In feeling. It said, "You're close, but you haven't chosen yet." I opened the journal. The ribbon around my wrist tightened. A new entry appeared. He'll be offered the suitcase again. But this time it will ask, not show. He must answer. The chamber darkened. A door opened behind the pedestal. I walked through. Another room. Smaller. Intimate. A table. A chair. The suitcase. Closed. Waiting. I sat. The journal opened itself. Blank pages. The ribbon untied itself, fell to the floor, and vanished. The suitcase clicked open. Inside, nothing. Just a note. It read, "What will you place inside?" I stared. My thoughts scattered. What had I brought? What had I lost? I reached into my pocket. The map. I placed it inside. The scent pulsed. I added the ticket. The ache deepened. I hesitated. Then I took the journal and placed it inside. The suitcase closed itself. The room shifted. The walls breathed. A voice, not hers, not mine, filled the space. He's chosen. He's archived. He's remembered. I stood. The suitcase was gone. The chair was gone. The table was gone. I was alone, but not empty. A door opened. I walked through. The train station again, but different. Brighter. The clock ticked forward. The tiles gleamed. A woman stood at the far end. Red coat. Eyes open. She smiled. I walked toward her. She held out a hand. I took it. Her touch was warm. Familiar. Ache and comfort braided together. She said, "You remembered." I nodded. She said, "You forgot." I nodded again. She said, "You chose." I whispered, "I did." She handed me a new journal. Blank. The cover bore a new symbol, a mirror with a ribbon tied around it. She said, "This one you write yourself." I opened it. The first page was dated tomorrow. I looked up. She was gone. The scent lingered. Lavender. Ash. Rain. I sat on the bench. I began to write. The journal she gave me was heavier than it looked. Not in weight, but in gravity. Each blank page felt like a door I hadn't yet earned the right to open. I sat on the bench long after she vanished, watching the clock tick forward, unsure whether I was waiting for something or being waited on. The scent had faded slightly. Lavender and ash now softened by something else, like old paper or the breath of a closed room. I opened the journal again. The first page still bore tomorrow's date. Beneath it, in handwriting that wasn't mine but felt like it had been borrowed from me, "Begin where you ended. End where you began." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I wrote. I remember the forgetting. The ink sank into the page like it belonged there. I turned to the next sheet. Blank. I hesitated, then wrote. She gave me the ache. I gave her the map. We traded truths. The journal pulsed faintly, like it approved. I stood. The station was quiet, but not still. The tiles shimmered. The clock ticked. The air felt like it was listening. I walked toward the exit. The door opened before I touched it. Outside, a street I didn't recognize, but knew how to walk. I followed the curve of the road, past buildings that flickered between familiar and strange. One moment, a bookstore with rearranging shelves. The next, a cafe where the menu changed depending on your regrets. I passed a mirror embedded in a wall. It didn't reflect me. It reflected the version that stayed. I kept walking. The journal grew heavier. I opened it again. A new entry had appeared, written in the margins. He's walking through the echo now, the place where choices reverberate. He must not look back. The ache will tempt him. I closed it. I didn't look back, but I felt the pull, like a thread tugging at the base of my spine. I passed a woman in a red coat. Not her. A version. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a question I couldn't answer. I nodded. She nodded. We kept walking. The street ended at a gate. Iron. Twisted. Familiar. I touched it. It opened. Inside, a garden. Overgrown. Wild. Flowers I didn't recognize bloomed in patterns that felt like memories. One pulsed with the scent of lavender. Another with ash. A third with rain. I walked the path. At the center, a bench. On it, a suitcase. Not mine. Not hers. New. Waiting. I sat beside it. The journal opened itself. A page turned. Blank. I wrote. I found the suitcase again. But this one doesn't remember me yet. The suitcase clicked open. Inside, a mirror. A ribbon. A photograph. The mirror showed nothing. The ribbon was untied. The photograph was blank. I touched the ribbon. It tightened around my wrist, then vanished. The mirror shimmered. The photograph began to bleed color. Slowly, an image formed. Me, standing in the garden, holding the journal. Behind me, her, eyes closed. Waiting. I turned around. No one there. I looked back at the photo. She was smiling now. I opened the journal. A new entry. He's in the garden of versions. The place where futures bloom. He must choose which seed to water. I looked around. The flowers pulsed. One wilted as I stared. Another bloomed brighter. I reached out. My hand hovered over a violet with edges like flame. The scent was sharp. I touched it. The garden shifted. The bench was gone. The suitcase was gone. The journal remained. I stood in a new room, walls of glass, each showing a different moment. One showed me writing the first entry. Another showed her handing me the journal. A third showed the mirror cracking. I walked slowly, absorbing each fragment. The glass didn't reflect, it revealed. I saw versions of myself I hadn't met yet. One was older. One was broken. One was laughing. I stopped at a panel that showed me asleep. The journal opened beside me, pages turning on their own. I touched the glass. It was warm. The journal in my hand vibrated. I opened it. A new entry. He's touching the future. But the ache belongs to the past. He must reconcile. A door opened. I walked through. Another chamber. Smaller. Circular. At the center, a pedestal. On it, a pen. Brass-tipped. Engraved. The same symbol. I picked it up. It pulsed. The journal opened. Blank page. I wrote. I choose to remember. The room darkened. A voice filled the space. He's chosen again. But this time, he writes the ache himself. I sat on the floor. The journal glowed faintly. I flipped through the pages. Each one now bore fragments, sentences, images, scents. I saw the train, the mirror, the ribbon, the photograph. I saw her, always her, waiting, watching, whispering. I closed the journal. The pen vanished. The room shifted. I was back in the attic. The quilt, the newspapers, the original suitcase. Closed. I opened it. Inside, the first journal, the gloves, the photo, the map, the ticket, all waiting, all unchanged. I placed the new journal beside them. The suitcase pulsed, then closed. I stepped back. The attic door creaked. I turned. She stood there, red coat, eyes open, ache and comfort braided together. She said, "You're ready." I said, "I'm not." She smiled. "That's how I know you are." She held out her hand. I took it. The attic faded. The house faded. The scent remained. Lavender. Ash. Rain. I opened my eyes. I was on the train. Again. But this time, I wasn't alone. She sat across from me on the train, red coat folded neatly over her lap. I steady, watching without blinking. The carriage was dim, lit by the same flickering bulbs that hummed in time with my pulse. But now the rhythm had changed, slower, heavier, like something was waiting to be said. I held the journal in my lap, the new one, the one I had begun to write myself. Its pages were warm. She didn't speak, but the silence between us was thick with memory. I opened the journal. A new entry had appeared, not in my handwriting, not in hers, but in a third style, precise, angular, like someone trying to remember how to write. He's not alone now. The versions are waking. The train is their spine. The ache is their breath. I looked up. She nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something I hadn't yet understood. The train moved without sound. Outside, the world blurred again, but not with speed, with recursion. I saw the attic, the suitcase, the garden, the mirror, the archive. Each flickered past like a reel of films spliced together from different lives. I saw myself in each one, sometimes searching, sometimes forgetting, sometimes choosing. I turned to her. "How many versions are there?" She didn't answer with words. She opened her hand. Inside, a key. Small. Brass. Engraved with the same symbol. She placed it on the seat between us. I didn't touch it. It pulsed faintly. The journal vibrated. I opened it. A new entry. He's being offered access. But the key opens more than doors. It opens selves. I reached for the key. The moment my fingers touched it, the train shuddered. Not violently, like a breath held too long. The lights dimmed further. The windows darkened. The scent returned, sharper now, lavender and ash braided with something electric, like ozone before a storm. I closed my hand around the key. The journal flipped open on its own. A page turned. Blank. I wrote, I accept the fracture. The train stopped. No announcement. No voice. Just stillness. She stood. I followed. The door opened. Outside, a station I hadn't seen before. Smaller. Older. The tiles were cracked. The clock was missing. The air smelled like endings. We stepped onto the platform. No one else. Just a single door at the far end, marked with the symbol. I held the key tightly. She said, "This is where they speak." I said, "Who?" She said, "The versions you left behind." We walked to the door. I unlocked it. Inside, a room of mirrors. Not reflecting. Projecting. Each one showed a different me. One was crying. One was laughing. One was screaming. One was silent. I stepped forward. The mirrors pulsed. The journal opened. A new entry. He's in the chamber of echoes. Each version holds a truth. But not all truths are his. I approached the first mirror. The crying version looked up. He whispered, "You left her too soon." I stepped back. The laughing version said, "You never knew her at all." The screaming one said nothing. Just screamed. The silent one stared. She stood beside me. "You must choose one to speak with." I hesitated, then pointed to the silent one. The mirror shimmered. The version stepped forward. Not out, but in. Into me. I felt the silence settle in my bones. He didn't speak, but I understood. He had watched everything, remembered everything, forgotten nothing. The ache was his language. The journal opened. A new entry. He's merged with the watcher, the one who never acted. He will now see what was withheld. The room shifted. The mirrors faded. We stood in a new space, an archive, but deeper than the last. These drawers didn't bear names. They bore choices. Stayed. Left. Lied. Forgot. Loved. Erased. I opened one. Inside, a ribbon. Not red. Blue. Cold to the touch. I tied it around my wrist. The scent changed. Rain. Salt. Ink. I opened another drawer. A photograph. Me. Her. A child. I didn't recognize the child, but I felt the bond. I placed the photo in the journal. It adhered like memory. She said, "You're building your own archive now." I said, "What happens when it's full?" She said, "You choose which version becomes real." I looked around. The drawers pulsed. The journal vibrated. I opened it. A new entry. He's close to convergence. But convergence is not completion. It is the beginning of permanence. I asked, "What if I choose wrong?" She said, "You already have. Many times. That's how you learned." We left the archive. The train waited. Different now. Brighter. The bulb steady. The rhythm calm. We boarded. This time, there were passengers. Each one looked like me, but older, younger, wiser, broken. They didn't speak, but they watched. I sat. She sat beside me. The journal opened. A final blank page. I wrote, "I am the version that remembers." The train moved. The scent faded. The ache remained. The train moved through a landscape that no longer obeyed geography. Outside the windows, the world folded in on itself. Streets became rivers. Rivers became hallways. Hallways became memories. The passengers, each a version of me, sat in silence, their eyes reflecting different timelines. One held a journal with pages torn out. Another clutched a photograph of someone I almost remembered. A third stared at his hands, ink-stained and trembling. I sat with her beside me, the woman in the red coat, though now the coat seemed darker, like it had absorbed too much memory. The journal lay open on my lap, the final page still warm from the last entry. "I am the version that remembers." She looked at me. "Are you ready to meet the one who doesn't?" I nodded. The train slowed. No station this time. Just a platform suspended in fog, surrounded by mirrors that didn't reflect but refracted, bending light and memory into shapes that defied logic. We stepped off the train. The passengers remained seated, watching. The platform pulsed beneath my feet, like a heartbeat too large to belong to one body. Ahead, a door. Brass. Engraved with the symbol. I held the key. It pulsed in my hand. I unlocked the door. Inside, a room of silence. No sound. No scent. No time. Just a single chair, facing a wall of glass. In the chair, a version of me I hadn't seen before. Eyes closed. Breathing slowly. Around him, fragments, gloves, ribbons, maps, tickets, journals. All scattered. All faded. I stepped closer. He opened his eyes. They were blank. Not empty, erased. She said, "This is the version that refused to remember." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because the ache was too loud." He looked at me. No recognition. No fear. Just stillness. I held out the journal. He didn't take it. I opened it. A new entry appeared. He's facing the void now. The version that chose silence. He must decide whether to fill it. I sat beside him. "Do you know me?" He blinked. "I knew someone once. He had your voice." I said, "That was me." He said, "No." He forgot. I said, "I remembered." He said, "Then you're not him." The wall of glass shimmered. Images appeared, moments I hadn't lived but had mourned. A child's laughter. A door closing. A hand reaching out and not being taken. I felt the ache rise. He said, "That's what I erased." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because remembering didn't change the ending." I said, "But forgetting erased the beginning." He looked away. She stepped forward. "You must offer him the suitcase." I said, "It's not here." She said, "It's always here." I turned. On the floor, the suitcase. Closed. Waiting. I opened it. Inside, a single page. Blank. I handed it to him. He stared. Then, slowly, he reached for the pen I hadn't noticed beside the chair. He wrote, "I remember the forgetting." The page pulsed. The room shifted. The wall of glass cracked. Not shattered, fractured. Through it, a garden. Overgrown. Familiar. He stood. Walked toward it. I followed. She followed. The garden bloomed around us. Flowers pulsing with scent. Lavender. Ash. Rain. Ink. He touched a violet edged with flame. It wilted. He touched a blue ribbon bloom. It brightened. I said, "You're choosing." He said, "I'm remembering." At the center of the garden, a mirror. Fractured. Reflecting all three of us. Me. Him. Her. The reflections shimmered, then merged. One image. One version. The journal opened. A new entry. He's converging. The versions are aligning. The ache is becoming language. I stepped forward. The mirror pulsed. I touched it. It was warm. He touched it. It was cold. She touched it. It was both. The garden faded. We stood in the attic. The quilt. The newspapers. The suitcase. Closed. I opened it. Inside, both journals. Both ribbons. Both photographs. The gloves. The map. The ticket. The pen. The page he wrote. I placed the final entry beside it. I remember the forgetting. The suitcase pulsed. Then closed. She said, "Now you must decide what to carry forward." I said, "What if I choose wrong?" She said, "You already have. That's how you learned." He stepped back. Faded. Not vanished, integrated. I felt him settle inside me, like a silence that had found its voice. She placed her hand on mine. "There's one more stop." I said, "Where?" She said, "Where you began." The attic door opened. The train waited. Empty. We boarded. The journal glowed. The scent returned. Lavender. Ash. Rain. Ink. The ache pulsed. The train moved. The train moved through silence now, not absence of sound, but the kind of silence that follows understanding. The windows showed nothing. Not fog. Not memory. Just stillness. She sat beside me, her red coat darker than ever, almost black, as if it had absorbed every version of grief we'd passed through. The journal lay open on my lap, its pages filled, pulsing faintly with the ache that had become my language. I looked at her. "Is this the last stop?" She nodded. "It's not the end, but it's where endings begin." I said, "Will I remember everything?" She said, "Only what you choose to carry." The train slowed. Outside, the attic. But not the one I'd entered before. This one was cleaner, brighter, as if memory had swept through it and left only what mattered. The quilt was folded. The newspapers were gone. The suitcase waited, closed, centered beneath a single beam of light. We stepped off the train. It vanished behind us. I walked to the suitcase. She stayed at the threshold. I said, "Aren't you coming?" She said, "I've already been here." I opened the suitcase. Inside, the journals, the gloves, the map, the ticket, the ribbons, the photographs, the pen, the page. Each object pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat preserved in ink. I picked up the first journal, the one that remembered me before I remembered myself. Its pages were still warm. I flipped to the final entry. It had changed. Now it read, "He returned. Not to remember, but to choose." I opened the second journal, the one I had written. Its final page was blank. I wrote, "I choose to remain." The suitcase pulsed. The attic shifted. The walls breathed. A mirror appeared on the far side, fractured but whole, reflecting not me, not her, but the ache itself, braided from every version, every silence, every choice. I stepped toward it. My reflection shimmered. Behind me, the versions. Watching. Waiting. I said, "What happens now?" She said, "You name the version that remains." I said, "How?" She said, "By writing the truth you never dared to speak." I opened the journal. The pen was warm. I wrote, "I loved her before I knew her. I lost her before I met her. I remembered her before I forgot myself." The mirror pulsed. My reflection fractured, then aligned. One image. One version. Me. Not the version that stayed. Not the version that left. Not the version that lied or forgot or watched. Just the version that remained. The suitcase closed. The attic faded. We stood in a field. Open. Endless. The scent was soft now, lavender and ash braided with rain and ink and something new. Something like peace. She stood beside me. No coat. No ache. Just presence. I said, "Are you real?" She said, "I'm the part of you that waited." I said, "Waited for what?" She said, "For you to choose." I looked around. The field shimmered. In the distance, a bench. On it, a child, holding a journal. I walked toward them. They looked up. Their eyes were mine, but younger, unfractured. I sat beside them. They handed me the journal. Blank. I said, "Do you know what this is?" They said, "It's the version I haven't written yet." I said, "Do you want help?" They said, "Only if you remember how to forget." I opened the journal. I wrote, "Once, there was a suitcase that remembered me first." The child smiled. The field pulsed. She stood behind us, watching, not waiting, just present. I said, "What happens now?" She said, "You live. And when the ache returns, you write." The child stood, walked into the field. The journal remained. I held it. I looked at her. She said, "You're ready." I said, "I'm not." She smiled. "That's how I know you are." The field faded. The attic returned. The suitcase waited. I placed the journal inside. It pulsed once, then stilled. I closed it. I stepped outside. The world was quiet, but not silent. The ache was still there, but it no longer hurt. It hummed. It guided. It remembered. I walked down the street. The mirrors didn't reflect. They shimmered. The bookstore rearranged itself. The cafe served memories. The train station ticked forward. I passed the bench. The child was gone. The journal was gone. But the scent remained. Lavender, ash, rain, ink, and something new. I whispered, "I am the version that remained." And the world remembered me back.